My name is Scott Challoner, and this is the Leaders Council podcast for the people who run the country and the people who keep the country running. You join us on a very windy and very cold winter morning here in the capital today as storms continue to batter the nation. But joining me on today's show to hopefully add a little bit more brightness to affairs is Adam Norsworthy, Managing Director of Fusion Telecom. Now, Fusion is a business which supplies secure telecom and payment services to business and contact centres under the PayGuard brand. Adam, very warm welcome to yourself today, and by all means, thank you for taking the time to join us on the show.
Good afternoon, Scott. Thanks for having me.
It's an immense pleasure welcoming you onto the programme today, Adam. Now, on this programme over the course of the last couple of years, and understandably so, the COVID-19 pandemic has been an incredibly hot topic, just given the significant effect it's had on industry and people's lives alike, and perhaps a significant change that has been sort of spurred on by the pandemic is the sort of changing trends in how people are paying for goods and services. We've seen the e-commerce space grow significantly during COVID, and there's more of a preference now for people to pay for goods online. And that is going to inevitably have an impact, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. We've seen the COVID-19 pandemic really pull technology forward. A lot of the technology, I think, existed beforehand. Certainly the regulation for the technology did. But people's adoption of the technology is what's really pushed it forward, made it much more prevalent in its use across business-to-business communication and in the payment sector and in many other sectors too. So we've really seen technology playing now a major role in everybody's working life at some point, and certainly for office workers and contact center workers, we're seeing that they're using multiple different systems, multiple applications over multiple different devices as a standard part of their day-to-day working life.
And even though we've seen sort of the end of sort of strict COVID restrictions in the UK for the time being, for sure, that sort of hasn't reverted to the status quo, has it? Technology is still playing a very significant part in people's lives. There's a lot of talk about it sort of being very much involved in the workplace of the future. And that preference to pay for goods and services online doesn't seem to be going away. So it seems that these changes that have been hastened by the pandemic, they're not going anywhere. They're going to be very much in place for the long term, aren't they?
Yeah, that's exactly right. And the reason is because technology actually helps businesses typically reduce their costs. It's more efficient. The communication is really strong now that people have got used to working with Zoom and Teams. And there is a difficulty in adopting new technology that many businesses have. And there's the sort of a hump that needs to be gotten over. And now that the COVID-19 pandemic has driven people to really work through that, they've got to the other side, and they found that, in the world of payments, for example, there are so many different ways in which people can pay, and there's cheaper ways in which you can pay, and there are faster ways you can get the money, and there's more secure and compliant ways that you can pay and looking after your customers' data. That they're really seeing that this technology, while it takes a little bit of time just to learn about it, understand how it fits into your business, once you've got through that, it really is a better way to do business. And that's why I think it's really here to stay.
Yeah, absolutely. And I suppose some of the sort of the negative aspects of that businesses are trying to sort of get around at the moment is sort of the risk element attached to that. Obviously, when it comes to payment solutions, you've always got sort of fraud risks in mind, and businesses do just have to be sort of very aware of these things when kind of making that transition, don't they? And I suppose maybe one or two have sort of been a little bit hesitant for those sorts of reasons.
Yeah, they have. And I think the payment space is one of the least understood. And part of that is because the rate of change is growing fast. So when we learn a new thing about payments, we think, right, okay, I've got that now. And in the space of learning that new thing, we find 3 more new things that have come around. And security around payments is definitely a key factor in people's decision as to what payment methods they use. It's not actually the biggest. The biggest is convenience. And that's why we're seeing, for example, people tapping their cards using chip and PIN technology for debit or credit card payments. It's not very secure. anybody can tap someone else's card, but it is very convenient. So that's the primary thing that's driving consumers in their payment choices. But the new methods that are coming out, because the new methods coming out are really well understood by the card issuers, by the banks, and by the regulatory bodies as being far more secure, because they realize it's up to them to really drive the security into the market as the customers favor the ease of payment. So we're seeing things like open banking, transfers, interbank transfers, and some of the new card payment technologies being far more secure than they were before.
And obviously with the advent of this, people talk about there may one day be sort of a cashless society. Could this maybe sort of hasten a move towards that in your perspective?
Yes, because cash has taken a big step back during the pandemic, and now debit cards are overwhelmingly the majority of transactions within the UK. And within that top mix, cash is still there in the top 5, but you have other things like direct debit payments, faster payment bank transfers. And just looking at faster payment bank transfers, now the money is really being transferred within seconds, typically less than 10 seconds and on average around 2 seconds from one bank account to another. And because it's done electronically using mobile banking, of which 84% of UK adults are registered and over 50% in 2021 used regularly, it's really accessible technology too. So it's very easy to pay by card. It's very easy to pay by bank transfer. And it's actually less convenient to have cash. Once you've run out, you have to go and get some more. And there's not much that people do at the cash point other than withdraw cash. So there's no other reason to go there. So these technologies are becoming so convenient that as the convenience replaces the convenience of using cash, we'll see that the cash will continue to decline.
Yeah, that's a very interesting point, certainly. And I think as well, when we sort of start to maybe see that transition start to truly sort of come about, I think what is going to be incredibly important, just because one thing that the pandemic has thrown into light as well is sort of a bit of a digital divide in certain parts of society, is that issue of accessibility that you talked about as well. And obviously having that digital access, if that's going to become the status quo for transactions, that's going to be so important, isn't it? And so if we're moving toward a cashless society, the key thing is to make sure that those people that are sort of disadvantaged digitally, maybe don't have the digital aptitude, perhaps like older people, they're not going to necessarily be left behind when that transition happens.
That's right. And there's a couple of things I think to say on that. One of them is that there is a really strong driver for improving the user experience and the user interface that people are working with when they're making banking payments and card payments and other payments. I remember when I was a lot younger buying software, in a shop with a CD and a manual, and it would take a while to install it. And then I would have to read the manual on how to use it, what the options meant and where things were. Nowadays, the idea of downloading an app on a phone and having to read a manual to know how to use that app is ridiculous, especially for anyone under the age of 30. So while technology is still not used by everyone, and there are some people really struggling with its adoption, it is getting much easier for people to use. And that's really being driven by the companies that want people to use their technology. The other thing is that not embracing these technologies life will become harder and harder. Fewer places will accept cash or all types of cash, and it'll become easier just to purchase things online. So with the ease of one thing becoming better and the difficulty of using the other becoming increasing as well, then I think we're going to naturally see a drive towards the adoption of these faster payment systems, and we're not really going to be worrying about leaving too many people behind.
Yeah, that certainly sounds very positive. And with sort of the demand for sort of digital services on behalf of merchants now sort of increasing, as we've seen during the pandemic, I suppose payment service providers have also got to try and shoulder the sort of extra demand in the short term while these sort of new technologies start to really kind of take hold. So has that, from sort of your experience, been something that they've dealt with well, that increased demand? Because that sort of comes with its own pressures, doesn't it?
Yeah, it's a really open space right now, and it's quite an exciting space for a lot of people. I think that technology has been quite difficult in many ways to engage with for various reasons over the past 30 years. But it really is becoming far simpler. And with things like application programming interfaces, APIs, becoming the standard way in which applications are built, but for everyone involved in the payments ecosystem, they're able to really technically communicate with other applications in a far simpler way. And that makes integrating these different programs or parts of these different systems much easier. And it allows customer-facing applications to take far more responsibility for the services that they're offering the consumer. So when the consumer can plug into, for example, if you have a banking account with a major bank, not only can you see your own bank account, but you can also, using that major bank's application, pull in your transactions from other bank accounts that you might have with different banking providers. So they really are playing their part. It's easier for them today to play their part because of API technology. And the consumer's really benefiting because wherever they're really plugging into this, they're not really having to understand the complexity behind it. That's done for them by their providers.
Mm. And I suppose that only bodes well for sort of that older generation we've talked about that are more likely to have sort of multiple accounts with multiple different sort of banking providers. I mean, although we are sort of far from being in a position where we know what the lasting impact is going to be, I suppose many of the sort of payment processing trends, as we've discussed, that we've seen during COVID are certainly going to be here to stay. And I'm actually just looking at some statistics from sort of 2019 and 2020 that we saw a doubling of online shoppers over the age of 60 who now sort of see sort of online transactions as sort of their preference. They don't go around sort of taking cash out with them anymore, and it's also sort of far safer for them to do that as well. So we can see already just sort of how it's sort of starting to shift towards that.
That's right. It's really important, especially for people who are 60, 70, 80. When we start doing biometric, it's very, which can fund that, but maybe it's just the face ID that you have on most smartphones or the thumbprint. So it's very easy to use. That's much more secure for older people than receiving a letter in the post that there might be a fraudulent letter attempting them to fill out a bank account on a piece of paper or scaring them to do so, or even via email. So, a lot of the passwords that we have today, we often don't have to remember because we've got iCloud keychain, and we've got the same sort of service offered by different other providers, Samsung, and online as well. There's password management tools. They're starting to become fairly standard, like Chrome. A lot of us store passwords in Chrome and they're encrypted. So many of us don't actually know most of the passwords that we have. And that sits really well for the older generation too. They want to be remembering lots of passwords. They don't want to be receiving stuff necessarily through the post where they can scan before or by email and then kind of understand if it's a phishing email or not. Simply using Face ID or a thumbprint, it's a very secure way. It's next to impossible to coerce people to do that in any kind of a remote way. So it does make it easier for them to adopt it and more secure for them.
Yeah, absolutely. And I suppose as well, when it comes to kind of the education side of things, just sort of away from sort of the direct payment processing side of things, I guess there needs to be a lot more awareness now of how to sort of buy goods and services in a safe way online, because what fraudsters, I suppose, naturally are going to do is conduct more fraudulent activity online, maybe try and sort of take advantage of fake vendor websites, that sorts of things. So obviously we have to become a lot more aware of online safety in that post-COVID digital world as a direct impact of that transition toward online transactions. So that's something sort of in the backdrop of all of this that is probably going to be very, very critical moving forward too.
Yeah, I really think there is a disconnect between how people feel about security in payments in general, how consumers feel, and what's actually going on. So we're seeing the Payment Card Industry's Data Security Standard release their version 4 this year, which is going to further support security around card payments. We're seeing the European Union issuing their Payment Services Directive version 2 a few years back, but that's now coming into force just in March, on the 14th of March this year. And that's going to be bringing in strong customer authentication as mandatory as part of the 3D Secure V2 for card online transactions. So all of this sort of security stuff that's going on really means behind the scenes there's a lot tighter security. And for consumers paying, they will be consistently seeing messaging around the types of businesses that they are paying. So for open banking transactions, for example, which can be done now online or over the phone, you will see multiple times the name of the business that you are paying. And not only that, you're not actually sharing any financial information with anyone, including the person that you're paying. They're simply contacting your bank, and your bank will say, yes, we understand you want a payment. We're not going to share the payment details of the person that you want a payment from. We can simply make sure that transaction happens as long as they authorize it. So there's actually less data that is available to be seen by hackers or fraudulent applications, and there's more opportunity for the consumer to see again and again and again when they're making these transactions. Are you sure? We've done a check. Does this business name match who you're attempting to pay? So I think really what we're seeing is an improvement in security, and we'll see a drop in fraud over the years going ahead with this technology, even though the process of pay is actually becoming simpler. But I don't think consumers feel that. They do feel a little worried about new technology, new opportunities for fraud, and how is that going to affect them. And I don't think that attitude is going to change until they really just continue to embrace the technology as they're doing in any case, because it is convenient, and start to see that fraud drop.
Yeah, exactly. And just talking about sort of adopting that technology, I suppose for a lot of SMEs that maybe sort of installed their first payment terminal for the first time just as COVID was kicking off, e-commerce capability is now sort of becoming a must-have rather than just sort of a nice extra, isn't it? And it's quite obvious from my perspective that in order to survive and thrive, what the business world needs to do is to now adapt to these new sort of payment processing trends and the changing consumer spending behavior.
Yeah, consumer spending behavior has really changed. And this is absolutely right. The businesses need to embrace all of these changes and offer consumers different ways in which they'd like to settle their accounts or make payments. We're seeing the increased use of Apple Pay, of Google Pay. We're seeing the increased use of tokenization of card bank information for recurring payments, so direct debit. Payments are increasing. We're seeing standing orders with banks increasing. And people really do have quite a wide choice as to how they would like to pay. And different people do like to pay in different ways because maybe they're more comfortable with something, they've had better experiences with something in the past. And we're seeing that businesses who are more flexible and open to adapting the way that they can accept payment really becoming more successful. And we're seeing that across the board with technology and in business operation in general. It's the same with the return to work from after the pandemic. Those businesses that are able to offer more working options for new members and existing members of staff in terms of are better positioned to retain staff, attract new staff. We're seeing that the same with payments. That companies can offer different payment options at the point of sale are more likely to have less payment attrition and happier customers.
Yes, exactly right. And just thinking about sort of the future now and what that sort of might bring in terms of sort of real changes that you're going to be focusing on within sort of the PayGuard brand. What sort of key things are you going to be focusing on over the remainder of this year, 2022, as this transition really sort of starts to take hold? Because even though, like I say, we might not see that cashless society we've talked about within the next couple of years, I suppose the signs are there that it is on the horizon. So organisations, businesses such as yourselves and those within the payment processing sphere, I suppose the idea is that they should already be planning for this to happen, shouldn't they?
Yeah, absolutely. I think people are often afraid in jumping into these new spaces because they're so complex and there's so much more information to learn. And a lot of us already have an overload of information running by us each day. And I think there's a responsibility that technology companies like Fusion Telecom have when we are developing products like PayGuard, that we embrace the regulatory framework, the changes in regulation, the security framework, changes in that too, and the changes in technology. We bring all of this together in such a way that we can help small businesses, large businesses, not have to worry about a lot of these things. And we can say to them, look, this ecosystem here is complex, it's changing, it's becoming more complex, but don't worry. We're going to bring all of that together for you. We're going to build a trusted partnership, and we're going to deliver a service and then an application on top of that that allows you to offer any particular way your customers pay, allows you to process transactions much cheaper than you're doing today, allows you to be compliant and really secure without having to study every part of the system. You simply have to be aware that there is this increasing complexity, and as a business, you need to embrace it. So I think there's a good amount of awareness that needs to happen and some education around that, and we're going to help people understand that fraud is reducing, and there's going to be a more secure systems and technology out there, but also that they really need to embrace working with different types of companies, not just in the payment space, but in the communication space.
Exactly right. And having mentioned that R word, regulation, is there anything that you personally, as an expert in the industry, sort of wants to see from government to sort of help facilitate that transition to the best possible effect? Is there anything they can do to sort of make that move toward a cashless society easier, if that is the way that things are really going to go?
I would love to see lots of things happening in government, and what's quite strange is in this particular place, I think they're doing incredibly well. The UK are leading the world by a long way in the security of banking payments and the payments in general, and we're also leading in terms of the ease of use. So, for example, the open banking framework is part of European legislation that the UK adopted 3 years ago, and yet it's been adopted within the UK by far. So the UK processes more open banking transactions than every country in Europe put together last year. So we are way ahead of where we should be. And I think that the UK government has done extremely well in balancing the requirements for security, the requirements for competition. That's another thing that's really helped the consumer and improved security, is the regulation around that. And being sensible in helping people meet reasonable requirements. So in this case, I think it's really a question of businesses driving positive change for their own benefit and for the benefit of their customers. And the government have done pretty well.
Yeah, exactly. And business now is going to have to really sort of take the rein, isn't it, and really drive all of this forward. And it is going to be a very fascinating time for the industry to kind of see just what kind of shape this takes and sort of how long it takes for that to happen. And something that we're certainly going to be keeping a very, very close eye on, because it does affect all of us, of course. And obviously for yourselves, I suppose that Fusion Telecom PayGuard, your priority is very much to be at the forefront of that as it really starts to take hold. And I suppose you're probably feeling, Adam, that it's exciting times for the business as well.
Yeah, that's right. We've always loved to be involved in innovative technology. And I really feel that this is an area that can help businesses, because a lot of us are more and more bogged down in the society that we have today with complexities that don't sit around our core product offering. The product or service we'd like to offer to the customers, and really thinking about those customers. A lot of the requirements that we have around a business, from a regulatory and security requirements and law, make a diversion of our focus, important and compulsory so much of our time. And so for me, reducing that admin and using technology to help businesses just provide great services is actually really exciting. And I think with payments, we've got a real opportunity to do that. You might have a lot of faith in business, and most businesses, certain business owners I've spoken to are simply trying to do the best they can with what they have, provide a good product and a good service for people. And there's a real need for them to have more space and freedom to be able to do that. And reducing the amount of administration and concerns they have around compliance and security will really help. And this technology that's available now for us not only gives the UK businesses a chance to improve and connect better with their customers, which is exciting for us, but it also gives them a chance to look beyond the UK, especially if they're in the digital space, because they'll be leading in terms of their own internal business processes for this sort of technology, and they can either take advantage of that by expanding out or in consulting those other markets. So being a part of that is just exciting for us, and it's quite special.
It's incredible, isn't it? And best of luck, of course, in sort of really taking advantage of those opportunities that are going to be there, Adam, over the course of the next year. And as we really start to see sort of this take hold and we start to see exactly what's going to be required on that front, I would relish the opportunity to sort of catch up with you again on the show and just talk about this even more and just assess the ever-changing situation, because it's in a constant state of flux at the moment, isn't it? And so it's something that's very exciting, changing all the time, and something we certainly should keep a very close eye on.
Yeah, it's really exciting to imagine how consumer trends are going to change over the next year, and what we're going to see emerging, and how a lot of this technology is going to be consolidated into applications that we use quite regularly. We've seen that to some extent already with things like Microsoft Teams, and where it started out just a few years ago, and the way it's consolidated so many things into this application, and with Zoom as well. How that might happen in other areas like the payment space, that's really, really cool to see how that'll progress. And a lot of that will be driven by consumers, as most things are. But in this particular case, there is a real opportunity for business to drive this, because there are so many benefits to business adopting this, in terms of much lower cost and improved security and lower risk and faster receiving payments, the same day or within seconds, rather than waiting them 3 days to clear. There's so many benefits to business. I think we'll see businesses driving this much more than we normally would. Let's see what happens.
Indeed, it's business adapting to the marketplace of the future, and given how quickly industry has adapted to the challenges that the pandemic has thrown at it, I suppose it's going to be immensely fascinating to sort of see how it can continue to adapt to these ever-changing trends. Absolutely. And Adam, I have to say it's been an immense pleasure once more welcoming you onto the programme. It's always fantastic talking to you, and thank you for taking the time to join us and to share some of your views and insights with the listeners, and I'm sure they've enjoyed the interview just as much as I have.
Well, it's a pleasure, Scott. Thank you very much for having me on the programme.
It was an immense pleasure welcoming Fusion Telecom Managing Director Adam Norsworthy onto today's show. And I do hope that everybody tuning in thoroughly enjoyed the interview just as much as I did. If you have been tuning in today and you feel that you might run your own business or organisation with its own story of success and innovation to share with us here at the Leaders Council, then by all means, we also want to hear from you. So why not also apply to be on our programme via leaderscouncil.co.uk/apply. Until next time, to all of our regular listeners, please do take care and goodbye.